In December 2020, millions of gamers around the world booted up what was supposed to be the future of gaming. Instead, they witnessed something else entirely.
Good morning, Night City! Yesterday's body count lottery rounded out to a solid and sturdy
This
30.
is the story of how one of the most anticipated games in history became its greatest disaster. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back, way back.
So I would like to draw you a vision. Imagine a rich and futuristic world with ultra-modern technology, which at the same time it's decadent and there's degenerated human society.
May 30th, 2012, CD Projekt Red, fresh off the success of The Witcher 2, makes an announcement that sends shockwaves through the gaming industry.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really honored to announce that we are working on a Cyberpunk game, but not just a regular Cyberpunk game, on the Cyberpunk game.
They're adapting Mike Pondsmith's legendary tabletop game, Cyberpunk. The promise is intoxicating, a living, breathing metropolis, a next-generation RPG that would redefine what games could be. The release date? When it's ready. CD Projekt Red wasn't just another game studio. They'd built their reputation on consumer-friendly practices. No DRM, free DLC, complete editions that actually felt complete. Their motto, "We leave greed to others," resonated with gamers tired of predatory monetization. But here's what they didn't tell you. While that flashy trailer played on screens worldwide, the vast majority of CD Projekt Red wasn't even working on Cyberpunk. They were deep in the production on The Witcher 3. In fact, real development wouldn't begin for another 4 years. 2016, The Witcher 3's final expansion, Blood and Wine, ships to critical acclaim. Finally, CD Projekt Red can turn their full attention to Night City. But something happens that would doom the project from the start. They hit the reset button. According to over 20 current and former employees, the game that had been in pre-production since 2012 was essentially scrapped. The third-person perspective? Gone. Flying cars? Deleted. Core gameplay systems? Redesigned from scratch. One developer would later describe it as trying to drive a train while the tracks are being laid in front of you at the same time. Think about that for a moment. After 4 years of pre-production, they started over, which means the Cyberpunk 2077 that launched in 2020 was really only in active development for 4 years. The same amount of time it took to make The Witcher 3. Except Cyberpunk was exponentially more complex. It required inventing entirely new systems, driving mechanics, gunplay, hacking, verticality The Witcher never needed, and they were building it on an engine, Red Engine 4, that was being developed simultaneously. The ambition was staggering, the timeline was impossible, but nobody wanted to admit it. E3 2018.
Have a great
The gaming world holds its breath as CD Projekt Red prepares to show Cyberpunk 2077 gameplay for the first time. The pressure is immense.
Microsoft, dude! Music.
6 years have passed since the announcement. Fans have dissected every screenshot, every tweet. The internet has already decided this will be the greatest game ever made. What journalists and fans see is breathtaking. A sprawling city, dynamic combat, car ambushes, a lived-in world that feels like the future of gaming. There's just one problem. It was fake. According to Bloomberg's investigation, the demo was almost entirely fake. CD Projekt hadn't yet finalized and coded the underlying gameplay systems. Those impressive car ambushes? They were missing from the final product. Multiple developers called it a waste of months that should have gone toward making the game. Here's how game development usually works. You build the systems first, then polish them for showing. CD Projekt did it backwards. They built a beautiful lie, then tried to make the game match it. But the demo did its job. Hype reached fever pitch. Pre-orders soared. The pressure mounted. Inside CD Projekt Red, developers watched the internet's reaction with a mixture of pride and terror. They'd created impossible expectations. Now they had to meet them, with systems that didn't exist, in a game that was barely functional. The demo wasn't just fake, it was a promise they couldn't keep. Let's talk about crunch. In the gaming industry, it's as common as energy drinks and pizza boxes, but CD Projekt Red had promised to be different. After The Witcher 3's development, which involved its own brutal crunch periods, leadership swore they'd learned their lesson. Non-obligatory crunch, they called it. Optional overtime. It was a beautiful lie. May 2019, reports emerged that some teams had already been crunching for months. 16-hour days, 6-day weeks. The non-obligatory overtime that everyone knew was mandatory. By September 2020, with the game delayed multiple times, CD Projekt Red makes it official. Mandatory overtime for everyone. Studio head Adam Badowski writes to staff, "Starting today, the entire studio is in overdrive." One former employee would later reveal they'd been crunching since July 2019. That's nearly a year and a half of overtime. Another reported working 13-hour days, 5 days a week. The game industry runs on passion. Publishers know that developers will sacrifice everything for their art. It's not exploitation if you love what you do, right? Wrong. The human cost was staggering, but the game still wasn't ready. Because here's the truth about crunch. It doesn't make games better, it makes them worse. Exhausted people make mistakes. Burned out developers write buggy code. Every hour of crunch is a debt that must be paid. And Cyberpunk 2077 was drowning in debt. April 16, 2020. That was supposed to be the launch day. Then it became September 17, then November 19. Each delay came with the same promise. We need more time for polish. Polish. It's a funny word in game development. It suggests something that's essentially complete, just needing a final shine. But inside CD Projekt Red, developers knew the truth. This wasn't polish. This was desperation. The game was nowhere near ready. One source said that when the April release date was announced, developers were shocked. They thought it was a joke. October 27, 2020. The game goes gold, meaning it's ready for production. 24 hours later, it's delayed again, to December 10. A game that had gone gold wasn't actually finished. The day one patch, they said, would fix everything. In software development, there's a saying, the first 90% of the work takes 90% of the time. The last 10% takes the other 90% of the time. CD Projekt Red was trying to do that last 10% in a matter of weeks, while their developers were already running on fumes, while the internet was watching. It was impossible. Everyone knew it was impossible. But admitting that would mean admitting that 8 years of promises were built on sand. The day one patch became a prayer, a miracle cure for a terminally ill patient. Here's something crucial to understand. Cyberpunk 2077 was announced in 2012, a full year before the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One even existed. This was always meant to be a last-gen game, but as development dragged on, ambitions grew. The game transformed into what one developer called almost a next-gen title. And here's where CD Projekt Red made a calculated and ultimately catastrophic decision. They would focus on the PC version. The console versions? They'd figure those out later. Later never came. Instead, they made another decision. They wouldn't send console versions to reviewers. Only PC codes went out. The reviews were glowing. The Metacritic score soared. Console players had no idea what was coming. December 10, 2020, launch day. Within minutes, not hours, minutes, the internet explodes with footage from PS4 and Xbox One. 15 frames per second, textures that won't load, NPCs in T-poses, crashes every 30 minutes. A city that was supposed to be the future, but looked like a PlayStation 2 game having a nervous breakdown. This wasn't just buggy, it was broken. But here's the truly damning part. CD Projekt Red knew. You don't hide console versions from reviewers unless you know they're unacceptable. The reason for all those T-poses? Memory leaks. Lead engine programmer Charles Tremblay would later reveal they had a choice. Either you show a T-pose or you hard crash. What do you prefer? They chose T-poses. Hundreds of them. A city full of broken puppets, frozen in digital rigor mortis. It became the game's most iconic image. December 11. CD Projekt Red's stock price begins to plummet from its peak of $31 on December 4. December 14th, the company issues an apology, promising to fix the game and offering refunds. There's just one problem. They never cleared this with Sony or Microsoft. December 18th, 2020, Sony does something unprecedented. They remove Cyberpunk 2077 from the PlayStation Store entirely. This was an extraordinary move. While games have been removed for licensing issues, a major platform removing a AAA title purely for quality issues was virtually unheard of. This wasn't just a failure, it was a historic disaster. Microsoft adds a warning label. Lawsuits are filed. Government investigations begin. CD Projekt Red loses $1.4 billion in market value. The future of gaming had arrived, and it was unplayable. Behind every corporate disaster are human beings, developers who poured years of their lives into a project, only to watch it crash and burn in the most public way possible. Reports emerged of developers working extreme hours, of promises broken about avoiding mandatory crunch, of a studio culture where overtime had become normalized. One former employee reported working 13-hour days. Another described the toll of extended crunch periods that began as early as July 2019. But here's what's often missed. The developers knew the game was broken. They'd been raising alarms for months. Their warnings were ignored. Imagine spending years of your life crafting something, knowing it's not ready, begging for more time, only to watch it get shoved out the door anyway. Imagine your name in the credits of a disaster. The human cost of Cyberpunk 2077 can't be measured in stock prices or refund numbers. It's measured in burnout, in talented developers leaving the industry, in passion extinguished. CD Projekt Red didn't just ship a broken game, they broke the people who made it. But had they really? Or was this always inevitable when ambition collides with reality, when marketing promises meet development timelines? For the developers of Cyberpunk 2077, that question had already been answered, and they were the ones who paid the price. January 2021, February, March, the patches keep coming. Each one promises to fix what's broken. Slowly, painfully, Cyberpunk 2077 begins to resemble what was promised. But can you redeem a betrayal of trust? The gaming industry's seen redemption stories before. No Man's Sky transformed itself through years of free updates. Final Fantasy XIV literally destroyed itself and rebuilt from scratch. But those games didn't have developers crunching for 18 months. Those games didn't fake their demos. June 21st, 2021, after 6 months of patches, Sony quietly returned Cyberpunk 2077 to the PlayStation Store. No fanfare, no celebration, just a quiet acknowledgement that the game had reached the bare minimum standard for sale. By 2023, something strange happens. The narrative begins to shift. The Phantom Liberty expansion releases to critical acclaim. An anime tie-in, Edgerunners, captures hearts on Netflix. Suddenly, Cyberpunk 2077 is being called one of gaming's great redemption stories. But redemption for whom? The shareholders who saw their stock recover? The executives who kept their jobs? The company that learned it could ship broken products and fix them later? What about the developers who burned out? The employees who left the industry? The trust that was shattered? Can you patch a broken promise? Can you debug a lie? By 2023, Cyberpunk 2077 is being called one of gaming's great redemption stories. But at what cost? The games industry has a short memory, but developers haven't forgotten. Across the industry, Cyberpunk 2077 has become shorthand for what not to do. Major releases are being delayed. Studios are being more transparent about development struggles. The words "when it's ready" carry new weight. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The conditions that created Cyberpunk 2077's disaster haven't gone away. Crunch is still endemic. Marketing still overpromises. Shareholders still demand returns. And somewhere, right now, a developer's working the 13th hour of the day on a game that won't be ready when it ships. The lesson of Cyberpunk 2077 isn't that one studio failed. It's that the entire system is designed for failure. When you promise shareholders infinite growth, when you market games years before they exist, when you treat developers as expendable resources, disaster isn't a possibility, it's an inevitability. And here's the truly insidious part. Cyberpunk 2077 made money. Despite everything, the refunds, the lawsuits, the reputational damage, it was profitable. The message to the industry was clear. You can ship broken products. You can destroy your workforce. You can lie to your customers. As long as the hype is big enough, you'll survive. The story of Cyberpunk 2077 isn't just about one game's failure. It's about an industry grappling with its own impossible promises. It's about what happens when the future we're sold collides with the present we live in.
Getting caught.
Look at Night City now. It's beautiful. It works. Players love it. By every metric that matters to the industry, Cyberpunk 2077 is now a success. But if you know where to look, you could still see the ghosts, and the features that never made it, and the people who aren't there anymore. And until that changes, until we value the people who make games as much as we value the games themselves, there will be another Cyberpunk 2077, another disaster, another cautionary tale that everyone will swear they've learned from, until they haven't. Because in the end, the real bug in Cyberpunk 2077 wasn't in the code. It was in the system itself, and that's one patch that nobody seems willing to install.